He said, without the microscopic observation, we cannot describe the fungi. And his book, those Iconus Fungorum, very valid one. And look, I put one picture here, Stachybotrys carterum, growing on paper, this fungus. It was named by Corda those days. Even today it is most valuable one. But one which you will see in literature as a wonderful work those days is the Tulane brothers, L.R. Tulane and C.R. Tulane. Two brothers, they studied in 1861 to 65, 4 years, the entire fungal kingdom, known those days. But the beauty of their work is the 3D pictures which they drew, 153 pages, and each page is something like the size of this screen, and that one page, if you see the picture, and they said, they were the one which proposed the unification of sexual and asexual, what we speak today, that one fungus, one name. In 2013, just a year ago, the dictum is no fungus will have two names, separate sexual or asexual name. One fungus in future will have only one name. So that kind of projection was made 150 years ago. It's nothing new. But what they showed was this kind of asexual phase and connected to the sexual phase. So, but using microscope, they made these observations. One, what you will see in literature as something like a Bible is the book of Sacardo. And in 20 years, he is one of the greatest in mycological studies. 26 volumes they wrote, each volume about 500 pages. In 26 volumes, all the hitherto fungi described, whatever language they described, he Latinized them, because without Latin it is not valid. So all he did was he Latinized them and compiled them in 26 volumes. Interestingly, last 2 volumes were compiled by his son. He was a medical doctor, but just to fulfill his father's desire, when Sacardo was bedridden, last 2 volumes were completed by his son. See the kind of dedication they had for this work. And I think these are some of the great lessons that we should draw from these pioneering works. And but interesting is this it's called Sacardone system of classification. He used color, structure, morphology and the pigmentation as the basis for classification. And these criteria are used even today in the classification of fungi. But Sacardone system was for 100 years it has been the dictum for fungal classification. Then we see some important names like E.W. Mason, who was also the director of Commonwealth Mycological Institute in 1944. He considered the dry and wet spores in fungi are biological characters. So he said it's very important for classification. Even today we can make some kind of meaning out of these structures, like dry conidia are seen only in some groups of fungi and wet spores are seen only in some of them. I put these 2 pictures to tell you that it's not only from other country, from the countries elsewhere, even from India we had some great personalities for who contributed for fungi. Professor C.V. Subramanian in 1962 independently he proposed a classification for fungi. It was at the same time about Stan Hughes from Australia and C.V. Subramanian, Tubaki from Japan, C.L. Barron from Canada. The four people independently worked, and interestingly, Professor C.V. Subramanian's classification was published in Current Science. It was a national journal, but very recently, I will tell you one very interesting episode. The editor-in-chief of Current Science, Professor Srinivasan, called me 3 months back and asked me to write an article on Professor C.V. Subramanian's biography. I want you to read this. Recently, on 25th May, issue of Current Science, this article is published. And Professor Srinivasan told me that they had to reprint the Current Science volume, that particular volume, because all the issues were sold because of that classification. So even an Indian journal with the world, if an idea is something phenomenal, it will have it will take us from world over. That's an example. And he proposed a classification those days, and even today it is recorded in a big way in the, if you look at the dictionary of fungi, they will tell you about his classification. And okay, so this particular system ruled for a long time, and this Deuteromycotina and Conidiogenesis, you will read this sometimes later in your classes. So 1950 to 200 and 2000, numerous fungi were described, both in Ascomycota and this Deuteromycota. These were some of the most outstanding works, and I put the picture of Bryce Kendrick because he is another one educated for unification of fungi. Just like Tulane brothers, he said we should have one name for the fungus. They should not be called just because they are, the complete picture is not there. So he conducted 2 conferences, major conferences called Kananaskis 1, Kananaskis 2, and they tried to understand the whole fungus. What is this whole fungus? So holomorph, anamorph, tenomorph, all these nomenclatures were proposed by that committee. But this is the history. But 1990 onwards, it was increasingly realized that asexual fungi, that classification of hyphomyces and coelomyces. Interestingly, I contributed, most of my contributions were on this group. It was realized that they are not validly recognized groups. There is an artificial assemblage of conidial fungi. And the distinction between these two are not absolute, because this morphology is mostly based on the environmental factors. So that should not be taken as a criterion. So, but unfortunately or fortunately, numerous such fungi were published, and volumes were published at that time. In 2007, a very important paper appeared in Mycological Research. It's called a higher level phylogenetic classification of fungi by Hibbett. If you see the number of authors, 57 authors are there in that paper. But that's an important milestone, because they summarized all the fungi until then described, and available literature. From available literature, what is the molecular understanding of them? So the molecular biology became an important tool for understanding these fungal systematics. And they try to reconstruct the fungal phylogeny. And from their studies, it became very clear that the earlier system was a polyphyletic, and they proposed a monophyletic system. And in this new system, Deuteromycotina was merged with the Ascomycotina. Mastigomycotina, many of them went out from that group. Myxomycota was removed from the fungal kingdom. So, I have put this picture again to tell you that there is no need to separate the asexual phase and sexual phase. Using molecular tools, signature, you can actually look at the fungus. If you see the life cycle of a fungus, anywhere in the life cycle, anywhere in this life cycle, anywhere if you take